You are standing on the west bank of the Nile. The year has no number yet. The sun has just dropped behind the desert, and the sky is bleeding from gold into deep violet. You are barefoot. The sand is still warm. Somewhere behind you, a fire crackles, and the low voices of your people rise and fall like water. You look up, and then everything you thought you understood about the world above you quietly ends. Because a light is moving where no light should move. Not a star, not the moon, not fire. Something round, something silent is descending toward the river, and it is getting larger. But what if that moment was not a myth? What if your ancestors, standing on this exact riverbank thousands of years ago, saw something real, something they had no words for, and did the only thing they could do? They carved it into stone. For thousands of years, the people of the Nile described beings that came down from the sky. They called them the Neteru, a word usually translated as gods. But the older meaning is stranger. It means the watchers, or the ones who come and go. And they were not described as spirits floating in the clouds. They were described as physical beings who landed, who taught, and who left. So let us go back to that riverbank, and let us watch it happen through your eyes. The disk is closer now. It makes no sound. There is no roar, no wind, no thunder, only a low hum you feel in your teeth more than you hear in your ears. It hovers above the black water, and the reflection beneath it splits into ripples of pale light. Your body does something ancient. Your knees fold, not because anyone told you to kneel, but because your nervous system has no other response to something this far beyond it. This is the birth of worship, not superstition, recognition. Now you understand why every temple you will ever build points at the sky. The doubt in your mind right now is fair. People see things. Memory bends. Stories grow. So let us leave the riverbank and look at what these people actually left behind, because the Egyptians did not just tell stories. They recorded. Walk into the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. It still stands today, and you can visit it. Deep inside, on a wall in a hidden crypt, there is a carving that modern eyes cannot unsee. It shows a large bulb-shaped object, and inside it, a long, wavy line stretching from one end to the other, ending in a point. The object is held up by a pillar, and a cable-like snake runs from its base to a box. Mainstream Egyptologists call it a lotus flower giving birth to a serpent, a symbol of creation. That is a fair reading, but engineers who have looked at the same image, including researchers who study ancient technology, point out something uncomfortable. It looks almost exactly like a Crookes tube. A Crookes tube is an early electrical device, a sealed glass bulb where a beam of energy travels from one end to the other. We built the first one in the 1800s. The Egyptians carved this on a wall more than 2,000 years ago. You do not have to believe it is a light bulb, but you should sit with the question of why it looks like one. Now travel a few hours north to Abydos, to the Temple of Seti I. Look up at a ceiling beam. There, among the standard hieroglyphs, are shapes that stop tourists cold when photos first spread across the world. One looks like a helicopter. Another looks like a submarine, or an aircraft with a swept-back wing. Here is where honesty matters, because this is exactly the kind of place where people invent things, and this prompt does not invent. The real explanation for the Abydos carvings is something called a palimpsest. That is a fancy word for a simple idea. It means the stone was carved with one set of symbols, then plastered over and recarved with a new set. Over the centuries, the plaster fell away, and the two layers overlapped, creating shapes that were never meant to exist together. So the helicopter is, most likely, an accident of erosion. That is the careful answer, and you deserve the careful answer. But notice what your mind does when it looks at those shapes anyway. It recognizes a machine, and that instinct, that pull, is exactly what the ancient astronaut theory is built on. The theory, made famous by the Swiss author Erich von Däniken in his 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, argues something simple and enormous. It says that the gods described by ancient people were not imaginary. They were extraterrestrial visitors, and the myths are eyewitness reports written by people who had no science to explain what they saw. Von Daniken has been challenged, corrected, and criticized for decades, and rightly so on many points. But the core question he asked has never gone away. And in Egypt, that question gets sharper when you stop looking at the carvings and start looking at the stones themselves. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. Not the mystery of who ordered it built, but the physical precision of it. In the 1880s, a real and rigorous archaeologist named William Flinders Petrie surveyed Giza with instruments more accurate than anything used before him. Petrie was not a fringe theorist. He is called the father of modern Egyptian archaeology, and Petrie found something that puzzled him for the rest of his life. He found granite that had been cut with drill holes. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth, and the spiral grooves left inside those drill cores showed that the drill had cut through the stone at a rate Petrie could not explain with copper tools and sand, which is what the Egyptians are supposed to have used. He wrote that the feat would require a downward pressure of tons and a cutting method he simply could not identify. That is not a story. That is a measurement made by a skeptic, published in the scientific record, and still debated today. So now hold the two things together in your mind. On one wall, an image that looks like technology. In the stone itself, cutting that looks like technology. And in the myths, beings who came from the sky and taught your ancestors how to build. Let us reconstruct that day one more time, now that you have the evidence in your hands. The disk has landed on the far bank. Figures move around it, tall and pale and calm, with eyes too large and bodies too thin. They do not attack. They gesture. They point at the stars, and then at the ground, and then at the river. And over years, over generations, something changes in your people. They begin to build in stone. They begin to align those buildings to the constellation of Orion, exactly as the researcher Robert Bauval proposed when he noticed that the three pyramids of Giza mirror the three stars of Orion's belt, down to the offset of the smallest one. Why Orion? The Egyptians said it was the home of Osiris, the god who came down, ruled, died, and promised to return from the sky. And here is the twist, the part that turns this from a story of wonder into something colder. What if the visitors did not come to save you? What if you were never the point at all? The Egyptian king lists, real documents like the Turin Royal Canon, record a first age when the Neteru ruled Egypt directly for thousands of years before any human pharaoh. And then, according to those same texts, the gods left. They handed the throne to humans, and they went back up into the sky. They did not stay. They did not explain. They started something on the banks of this river, and then they walked away from it, the way you might walk away from an experiment that had finished running. Maybe that is the real message hidden in all that stone. Not that you were chosen, but that you were begun, and then left to finish yourselves. Now come back to your own body, in your own time, holding a glass rectangle that lets you speak to anyone on Earth, because that ancient instinct never left you. It is why in 2017, the Pentagon quietly admitted it had been studying unidentified aerial phenomena. It is why Navy pilots have filmed objects that move in ways our physics cannot yet account for. It is why NASA now openly searches distant worlds for biosignatures, the chemical fingerprints of life. We call it disclosure. Your ancestors called it religion. But you are both looking at the same sky, asking the same question, feeling the same fold in your knees. You are standing on the west bank of the Nile. The year has no number yet, and you look up at a light moving where no light should move. Now, thousands of years later, when you look up at that same sky, ask yourself the only question that ever mattered. They came down once, and then they left. So the real question is not whether they were here. It is whether they are coming back.